Welcome everybody! So we're gonna make a lore video about the general history of the Overlord's New World from the present day where ainz starts all the way back to over 600 years ago. I'm gonna be using some notations, two specifically, well one really. It's gonna be YBA and YAA. We're only gonna hear YBA right now, which is years before ainz. It basically means 600 years ago, or however many years ago. And so let's start. We'll start with the age of the Dragon Lords. So over 600 years ago, because something did happen 600 years ago, over 600 years ago, it's hard to talk about the past of the New World because it has few to no written oral tradition past 200 years ago, and absolutely nothing is known from 600 years or more. Therefore, I postulate that humans have actually not been able to establish any sizable kingdom lasting more than probably a couple dozen years since the slain theocracy was established 600 years ago. Up until then, humans were treated pretty much worse than slaves. They were seen as breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The era was one of brutal natural supremacy, survival of the fittest, but with humans unable to form any kind of sizable settlements with defensive structures due to the presence of immensely powerful demi-humans, they were forced to live their lives on the run, most becoming livestock or slaves. At the top of this natural hierarchy rested the mighty dragons, and at the top of the dragons were their dragon lords, beings able to wield wild magic, the magic of the souls. They innately possessed it and passed it down only through their bloodlines. They truly were the rulers of the world. Except I don't believe they liked or cared much about what was happening internationally. Humans and other races were heavily discriminated and attacked, but they really just didn't care. As the present, the past of the New World did include runesmithing, martial arts, and innate talents, but there was no such thing as commonplace magic, not even magicians, as magic was solely the domain of the Dragon Lords. Humanity truly was doomed to extinction. Then, someday, one of their own did something that caused a curse to befall the world. Now, and every century henceforth, the world would receive outsiders. After he did this, 6 players from the Dive MMORPG of the future were, hypothetically, taken from the game and woke up in the new world. And this happened 600 years before ainz, or 600 YBA. I believe that an indeterminate number of players from our world, or the anime's take on our world in the future, are taken to the new world as their gaming avatar. The idea came partly from this scene in Season 2, Episode 1 of the anime, and the fact that a major event involving at least one suspected player has been happening every 100 years. Now, 600 years ago, the 6th Great Gods era. 600 years before ainz, the slain theocracy was founded. It would last until the present day. This feat will be explored at a later time, but it had a huge impact on the surrounding humans who eventually also started forming countries. The starting point for this ray of sunshine in the bleak state that was near extinction was the arrival of 6 individuals who would later be called the 6 Great Gods. A god of earth, fire, water, light, air, and dark. 5 humans and 1 undead. The gods rallied and saved the humans, allowing them the peacetime required to build up new defenses, train up soldiers, and stockpile food. As the human cities grew and their walls thickened, the gods taught the citizens the best way to use the newly discovered tiered magic that arrived in the world with the new gods. The 6 deities also came into contact with the Dragon Lords, parlaying their goodwill, only wishing to live in peace with the humans. The Dragon Lords had noticed their wild magic powers being slightly disturbed by the introduction of tiered magic, but they agreed to let the 6 deities be, on condition not to upset the power balance of the world too much. The beastmen, humanoids, the heteromorphs, all the other monsters that had terrorized humans for food and for sport would now know the might of the hairless apes. Humanity began to organize as an ant's nest before winter. Magical academies popped up alongside martial schools. Production lines created industrial sectors with master smiths. New tools and inventions started appearing as the human spirit flourished for the first time in potentially millennia. After the humans were well on their way to self-sufficiency, the gods, being actually quite human, died of old age one after the other, leaving only the god of death, being undead. They were present for the next cataclysm that would change the world. That cataclysm would be 500 years before ainz, or the era of the 8 Greed Kings. Arguably one of the most violent eras in Overlord's history, 5 centuries before the present day, the 8 kings of greed descended upon the world. Initially wary and defensive, they quickly realized that none in this world had the power to oppose them, except one type of creature, Dragon Lords. The greedy kings then decided that, since the world was so ripe for the plucking, it would only be right that they be the ones to eat it. Thus, they began their world conquest. They conquered country after country, kingdom after kingdom, and in the end, only one was able to remain against them. The Arglan Council State, made up of all the remaining Dragon Lords. Now, wild magic had been severely deteriorated by the introduction and use of tiered magic, resulting in a general weakening of the dragons in these days. Opposite of the dragons' weakening powers, the human population actually started doing even better after most countries were under the great Greed Kings, mostly due to the human bias that the former players had, so they gave preferential treatments to them. The true dragons then went to war with the Greed Kings, resulting in a massive clash where much blood was spilled, though killing one king resulted in the life of 10 of the true Dragon Lords in exchange. Such was the attrition the dragons were taking. Unfortunately, the kings were simply too ferocious, and when their fallen comrades started making their appearance again on the battlefield, the dragons knew that they could not hold out, and thus the last few scattered across the world. The 8 Greed Kings, although diminished in their power through repeated death in battle and resurrections, were still the uncontested rulers of the New World. For a fortnight, then their greed truly surfaced, and they started arguing about rulership and shouting about it, and in the end, they killed each other in a mad and power-hungry grab by all of them. After their self-demise, the Platinum Dragon Lord came to rest in their guild hall, protecting all of their powerful items against future threats. Now, we skip 400 years ago because nothing is known about this period. We are going to go to 300 years ago, 300 years YBA, where 2 events happened. The first one, not much is known about it, but about 300 years ago, a player with a powerful one-time use item was summoned into the New World and quickly found and killed by the Deep Darkness Dragon Lord. The powerful world-class item that was carried by the player was taken by the dragon, who still to this day resides in its deep caverns under the earth. Not much more is known about this incident except that it happened. The other happening in the same century was the Minotaur Sage. The Minotaur Sage was most definitely a player, and was named Sage not because of his unrivaled strength and magic weapons, it was said he could create tornadoes with a strike, but because of his unorthodox ideas of implementing household appliance and technology like refrigerators and pots and pans to the Minotaurs. The Minotaurs were confused, but they also didn't want to gainsay their leader, so they followed him and all his strange gizmos. Also, it's said that the reason the Minotaur Kingdom still stands through the aggression of its beastman neighbor is due to the power of the magical items that the Minotaur Sage left behind, which makes me believe they were probably Yggdrasil artifacts. Secondly, the Minotaur Sage did the great cultural policy change of putting humans in slavery. And this sounds bad, but it's actually better than what humans were before, which was breakfast, dinner, and lunch. And so I think everybody kind of agreed to wear the chains, you know? Anyway, 200 years before ainz, the era of the evil deities and the 13 heroes. Not much is known about the evil deities who showed up suddenly 200 years ago and started wreaking havoc and destroying whole countries. The 13 heroes stopped most of them, and I believe their leader was a player. But I also believe that all the evil deities were also players who had heteromorphic characters or just characters with evil karma. The death nail of runecrafting was also in 200 YBA, when the demon god incident occurred. Well, the same thing as the evil deities incident, just a different synonym for the name. The dwarf kingdom, which had it as a tradition to runesmith, was hard pressed to get enough weapons for the fight, so they switched to tier magic because it has an instantaneous casting speed, whereas the etching of runes takes days, weeks, and even months. The flip side is that there's no material cost for runesmithing, and you do have to maintain magic weaponry. This era resulted in the vast majority of the countries to be destroyed that were on the continent. All or most of the countries that we see in the current timeline are less than 200 years old. The Barut Empire, the Belize Empire to the west, and the Kingdom to the north are all new, less than 200 years old, from this era. Now, we go to the present, the era, and I'm going to call it the era of the Sorcerer King, ainz, because we all know where this is going. In Overlord's present day, when Momonga arrives in the New World, humans have already carved out a large spot for themselves in the world, with the Barut Empire and Slain Theocracy both boasting impressive military might and magical users of prodigious power, relatively. Beast folks and other humanoids are starting to fall behind technologically, as they promote physical might more than intelligence. But one skelly boy is about to overturn the world order. Momonga not only starts gaining territory, but he also encounters dwarves, and around volume 11 he integrates them into his kingdom, promoting the resurfacing and rediscovery of their lost art of runecrafting. That was basically it for the 600-year history of Overlord. As of now, we're caught up to the present. This is what I could mostly find about the history. Please leave a comment if you enjoyed the video, and tell me which part of the lore you'd like covered next. I was thinking I could do magic systems, some characters, or just more world building. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys later. Goodbye.